please welcome our guest speaker, Craig DeLuz. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I just want to thank each and every one of you who helped get the word out about this particular event, and for Turning Point for inviting me. The last time I was invited to speak at Sacramento State University, it was a political debate between, the Democratic Socialist Party, the All African People's Revolutionary Party, and myself. So needless to say, it was an interesting time. Now, I want to say something. You know, I was introduced as a conservative speaker, and yes, I am conservative. I like to consider myself a card-carrying member of the vast right-wing conspiracy. But I'm not here to speak on a conservative issue. In fact, the right to keep and bear arms is supported by people across the political spectrum. It's unfortunate that many, once they get into elective office, on one certain side of the aisle, don't necessarily believe that they can fully and openly advocate on behalf of this constitutionally enumerated right. Before we get started, though, I want to just lay a little bit of groundwork. Let me ask you, please do me a favor and raise your hand if you consider yourself to be pro-gun. Okay, excellent. Now, raise your hand if you believe yourself to be pro-Second Amendment. Excellent. Now, raise your hand if you believe in reasonable gun regulations. Yeah, do me another favor. Now, raise your hand if you tell me you believe in reasonable gun control.
Kind of the same thing.
What? No, this is reasonable gun control. One of the things that you're going to find out, and one of the things that I'm hoping that you'll walk away from on this, and as we talk a little bit about this, is to understand that this is not an issue that is as easy to understand as many people think. In fact, I would say that in the entire state of California, when it comes to people who understand the technology, the culture, the industry, and the policy relating to firearms and how they intersect, there are probably a grand total of 5 people in the entire state of California who truly understand all of those and how they intersect. And I can tell you there is probably only one that works in the California State Legislature, and none of them work for the governor of the state of California. I think that's vital for you to understand. I think oftentimes what happens is many people, when they hear the idea of, well, you know, I believe in reasonable gun regulations. Well, let's just take a step back. Let's just go, and we were talking about laying a foundation. One of the other things that I wanted to make sure to tell you is that if we're going to debate the idea, any idea that is a quote unquote reasonable gun regulation, the first question that I'm going to ask you is, does it infringe on my right to keep and bear arms? Or rather, how does it infringe on my right to keep and bear arms? And understand that as you promote your regulation, you talk about your regulation, it is incumbent upon you to then prove that it does not infringe on my right to keep and bear arms. Now, a lot of people want to talk about, oh, well, but it's just an inconvenience, or it's just not really, it's reasonable, it'll make people feel safe. Well, we have to take a step back and understand exactly what the Second Amendment is. First of all, the Second Amendment, as it is in our Constitution, it comes from our fundamental right to self-defense. We have a fundamental human right to defend ourselves, right? Philosophers throughout the ages have talked about the importance and once again, the fundamental right that an individual has to be able to defend themselves. And so then in our Constitution, in our Bill of Rights, it is enumerated. Now, I want to be very clear. Our right to keep and bear arms is not derived from the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment simply secures it. As our Declaration of Independence states, you know, all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But a lot of people forget the next part. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. See, the government their job is to secure those rights. They do not give them to you. The right to keep and bear arms, the right to defend oneself is not given to you by the state of California. It's not given to you by Sac State. It's not given to you by the government, by the federal government. It is yours inherently. Now, we have a responsibility to then defend those rights. Each generation has a responsibility to make sure that they do what they can do to secure and defend those rights. Now, the challenge we have in today's day and age is that there's this belief that I have a right to feel safe. Now, while I do want to say that everyone should feel safe, everyone should have the ability to feel safe, and other individuals feeling safe should not take precedent over my fundamental right to protect myself. And that's where we are in an argument right now, as the media has gone out of its way to utilize and distort statistics and events in order to push an agenda that, quite frankly, the numbers and facts simply don't support. And oftentimes what I find myself arguing when I'm sitting in the California legislature, when I'm sitting in the legislature in the state of Nevada, when I'm in Washington, D.C., sitting in a congressman's office, I find myself oftentimes having to educate them on the facts. Like, for example, people want you to believe that the evilest thing on this earth is the AR-15, is the semi-automatic centerfire rifle. They want you to believe it's the most evil thing in the entire world. But what they will not tell you is that rifles as a whole, are used in less than 3% of all firearm crimes. Less than 3%. Centerfire rifles, semi-automatic centerfire rifles are a small subset of rifles as a whole. So we're talking less than 3%. They'll also want to tell you that, well, we have this epidemic of gun violence. What they won't tell you is 2/3 of all firearm deaths are in fact suicides. 80% of the rest are drug or gang related. 80% of the rest are drug or gang related. They want to tell you that we need to do background checks. Background checks are vitally important. But 96% of the firearms that are secured, that are used in a crime, were not used by the original purchaser. So please tell me, what good is a background check going to do? These are all, once again, facts and statistics and things that when I'm dealing with legislative members, when I'm dealing with the media, things that have to be re-educated, things that you have to communicate with people to help them to understand. And I will tell you, the thing is that first of all, most people don't know much about firearms. The sad part is, many gun owners don't know much about firearms. They may know about their firearm, but they may not know about firearms as a whole. And then a lot of people have absolutely no idea about gun laws. How many of you believe that there is such thing as a gun show loophole in the state of California? Okay, well, evidently I'm in a room of people who do know that there is no gun show loophole.
So one hand at the back, that's okay.
Okay, understand that the gun show loophole basically says, well, basically their belief is that you can walk into a gun show and you can buy any sort of firearm without a background check or without a waiting period. In fact, you just recently had at the Cow Palace in San Francisco, the board of directors over the Cow Palace has now banned gun shows at the Cow Palace because they believe that it brings a negative influence, that it promotes violence in their community. Now, mind you, in the entire city of San Francisco, there is not one gun store. Not one. They've literally been regulated out of existence. And the mayor of Daly City noted before the California State Legislature that they are passing regulations in order to discourage gun stores from opening, and those that currently exist, they're trying to get them to close. This is a politician, this is an elected official, a representative who is stating that they have as a fundamental goal to eliminate entities that facilitate the exercising of a constitutionally enumerated right. Now, what if we treated other civil rights like that? How many of you have heard the saying that, well, we do have limits like on freedom of speech. I mean, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. How many have heard that one before? I submit to you, yes, you can. In particular, if there's a fire. But here's the thing. What we've done in this country is we've actually passed laws that provide consequences when individuals abuse their civil liberties, when they abuse their rights. right? So if someone yells fire in a crowded theater and there is in fact no fire, and it causes damage to either the facility or to the theater or to individuals, that individual is held accountable. But here's what we don't do. We don't take duct tape and muzzles and put them on people's mouths before they walk into the theater. But that's how we treat the Second Amendment. We treat the Second Amendment as if, well, we're not going to allow, because one person out of 20,000, 100,000 may decide to abuse their right to keep and bear arms. We are now going to take away the rights, infringe upon the rights of all citizens. And let me be clear, I don't care whether you choose to own a firearm or not. You have a right to keep and bear arms. If they infringe on my right to keep and bear arms through law, they're infringing on your right to keep and bear arms. Because see, just because you don't choose to exercise it doesn't mean it is not your right. Many of you choose not to protest. Many of you choose not to vote. Right? Many people choose, well, I don't want to have any personal property. But it doesn't matter. The fact is that it's your right. It is your fundamental right to be able to do those things. And when you allow individuals to take away one of those fundamental rights for a perceived security, then none of your rights are secure. If there is one message that I get to you today, that I help you to understand today, it's number one, know your rights. Know what they are. Take the time to educate yourself. Because I'm going to be honest with you. The criminal justice system, your rights are secondary to them. I know some of you, I'm a law and order person. I support law enforcement. But I'm going to tell you that their job, or as they see it, is to catch people who do bad things and put them in jail. That's their fundamental job. And in many cases, I hate to say this, they may or may not even know the law when they are dealing with you. For example, how many of you have heard of it being against the law to conceal carry a long gun? Well, evidently there was one law enforcement officer, one assistant district attorney, and one judge in San Joaquin County who thought it was against the law as well. There was an individual for whom we represented who was on his way to the shooting range. He had his firearm, his long guns in the back seat. He was pulled over for, I don't even remember for what. The officer saw the long guns and said, well, you're improperly transporting them. I'm going to arrest you for concealed carrying a long gun. Now, I get that the law enforcement officer would seize the firearms because he probably doesn't know. He's not a lawyer. He's got so much of the penal code he or she has got to remember. Okay, but I'm assuming that an assistant district attorney would know the law. Yet that assistant district attorney decided they were going to go ahead and file the charges anyway. So one of our attorneys, Adam Richards, from here in Sacramento, decided, or he went and he represented this individual, went in and actually provided an entire legal brief on exactly why what he was arrested for actually was not a crime. He wound up getting a factual finding of innocence. Now, any of you who are pre-law know that that's different than being found innocent. It's different than having the charges dropped. It, in essence, means that it's as if it never happened. It is nowhere now on that individual's record. But see, oftentimes when it comes to the law, when it comes to gun owners, being a gun owner or someone who wants to exercise your right to keep and bear arms, it is okay if they make a mistake on you. It's okay to discriminate against you, the gun owner. Now you may be saying, well, what do you mean discriminate against? Well, I'll give you another example. In the state of California, many people may not know this, but if you have a picture of a handgun, if you have a retail store and you have a picture of a handgun, it cannot be seen outside your store. If it is on the outside of the store, or if it's on the inside and can be seen from the outside, you can lose your license in the state of California. How do I know this? I know a guy. This is an individual that we actually represented against Attorney General Kamala Harris. Wound up taking them to court. Now, mind you, I just want to just as an interesting side note, right next to the picture of the handgun was a fully decked out AR-15. I mean, we're talking all the assaulty features, I coined that word, assaulty, all the assaulty features that scare people who are afraid of firearms were on the AR-15. That wasn't illegal. But the Smith & Wesson revolver was illegal. Wound up taking it to court, and guess what? The law eventually would wind up getting thrown out. See, it's important for you to understand that for many who argue against the Second Amendment, facts don't matter. The law doesn't matter. In their eyes, they are doing the right thing. And because they're doing the right thing, they feel like they can ignore the facts. Another great example. How many of you believe that the Center for Disease Control is not allowed to conduct gun violence research? Okay, now, what people do is they always refer to the Dickey Amendment. They say, well, the Dickey Amendment makes it so that so that the CDC cannot do gun violence research. But if you read the specific language of the Dickey Amendment, all it says is this: none of these funds may be used to advocate or promote gun control. It may not be used to advocate or to push gun control. So the CDC decided that since they were not allowed to advocate and push gun control, that they were not going to study gun violence. Now, I said this, I shared with every member of the California State Senate Public Safety Committee, shared a copy of the Dickey Amendment, read the Dickey Amendment in committee. And yet and still they proceeded to say, well, the Dickey Amendment does not allow you to does not allow them to study gun violence, because they're not really interested in the facts. They're interested in doing what feels good, what makes them feel like they're doing the right thing. And so whenever we're looking at politics, and the worst part is that in many cases, you've got folks on either side of the aisle who really don't understand the issue. And I'm talking about Republicans too. How many of you are familiar with red flag laws? Or they call them extreme risk protection orders. So here's what they are for those of you who do not know what they are. It's where an individual who you may or may not know goes to the court, goes to a judge, and says that you are a danger to yourself or others. You may take a gun and go shoot somebody, or you may kill yourself. And then that judge then issues what's called a gun violence restraining order. That's what it's called in the state of California. In other places, it's called extreme risk protection order. But then they issue this. That basically states that it is now illegal for you to own, possess, or purchase firearms. Now, with this, the judge also issues what's called a gun seizure warrant. This tells law enforcement this individual is a danger to themselves or others. This individual because of that, has been prohibited from owning or possessing firearms. We need you to go take their firearms. Now, given that's the only information that law enforcement is given, so the law enforcement goes to that individual's home with the flowers and candy, and they politely knock on the door. And no, that's not what they do. Law enforcement generally shows up. They show up with a team, with full tactical gear, prepared to meet this individual with force if necessary, in order to seize their firearms. Now, the gun seizure warrant gives them the ability to search the individual, any place they believe the individual has a gun. Their home, their place of business, their girlfriend's house, their mother's house, wherever they think that individual might have a firearm. Now, once they've seized the firearms, within the next 21 days, that individual now has the ability, now goes before a judge and has to now explain why they are not a danger to themselves or others. Now, mind you, understand this. The hearing that took place was what's called an ex parte hearing, the first hearing, meaning you didn't know about it, you weren't there. So you don't even know that a bunch of cops armed to the teeth are about to knock on your door to seize your firearms. By the way, if you think this sounds like a bad situation, it did for one African-American gentleman in the state of Maryland. who lost his life to law enforcement because of one of these very same laws. So it creates a dangerous situation. So, by the way, so now you've got your day in court. Now, mind you, in many cases, that individual who actually filed for the gun violence restraining order, they may not even have to be there. So you never even get a chance to face your accuser. They don't tell you what's the standard for how you've lost your rights. What's the standard? How do I prove that I'm not a danger to myself or others? How do you prove that? Do I need to go see a psychiatrist? Do I need to get a lawyer? What is it that I need to do in order to prove that I am not a danger to myself or others?
Is it that you don't?
Yeah. In many cases, and this is the other thing, in many cases you have prosecutors actually discouraging individuals from getting an attorney and bringing an attorney to court with them. This is all documented. Oh, by the way, let me just one more side note. So in the states where they actually have these strictest laws, these strictest standards for how you obtain these, this means it has to be corroborated, which, by the way, in most cases, it does not have to be corroborated by anyone else. Where there has to be, in some cases, at least 2 corroborations, where you have to actually go in and give a statement to law enforcement, and you have to be present in court and testify before a judge. And you have to go, the law enforcement officer has to do an independent investigation. The 2 places, state of Indiana and in the state of Connecticut. In those 2 places, they found that over 30% of the time, they had to give the individual's firearms back in that hearing. Meaning 30% of the time, in the states with the laws, with the strictest standards, 30% of the time, they took away someone's rights that they shouldn't have. Let's think about exactly what those rights were. Let's see. There's obviously their Second Amendment right. How about the right to due process? For people who believe that having a court hearing after the fact is due process, let me tell you, due process is before you lose your rights. It's before. Any process that takes place after you've lost your rights, after you've lost your property, after your home has been searched, yeah, that's not due process. But you've also lost your private property rights because your firearms are your private property. You've lost your right against unreasonable search and seizure. Think about it. They're searching your home. They're searching your place of business. They're searching your mother's home. They're searching your car, and you have committed no crime. Now, this is all in the name of mental health. We have to protect people because, these are individuals who might be mentally ill. But then why is it at no point in this entire process has one mental health professional been engaged in the process? Not one. There is not one law in the entire nation, not one red flag law in the entire nation that involves mental health professionals. None of these red flag laws. Once again, I'm sharing these examples with you because it's vitally important that you guys understand that if we allow one of our constitutional enumerated rights, one of our fundamental human rights to be taken away, then they will come after the others. They will come after your right to freedom of speech. And you guys see it on campus. That's why Turning Point exists. Because there are individuals who believe that some of the ideas that you have are dangerous. The worst part is, this is so sad. I remember, you probably believe from the gray hair. I was around before the internet. I was around before Facebook, before Twitter. I remember the world when you actually, if you wanted to have a political debate with somebody, you actually had to have a face-to-face with them. And, the thing that what I thought would happen with social media was that, or the internet in general, is that we would have access to all of this information and we would be able to have conversations and be more informed as we debate and we discuss. And we may be coming from different perspectives, but at the very least, we can look at the same information and the same data. The problem is that the way in which what it's done is done the exact opposite. It's allowed us to actually skip over people with whom we disagree in order to seek out and find people with whom we agree. And so we collect together, we create groups, we go to only the pages that are people that we agree with, we unfriend the people with whom we disagree. But here's the thing, folks. I'm just going to tell you this. If the people that you communicate with are only people with whom you agree, you don't have all of the information. I use this as an example. I always say, all right, if I'm standing here in the front of an elephant and I'm describing an elephant, I'm going to describe it one way. And that's my brother, by the way, back there in the back, David. Needless to say, he's standing at the, he's a Democrat. He's a Democrat. He's standing at the rear end of the elephant. If you ask both of us to describe, based only on what we see, what an elephant looks like, you're going to get two very different descriptions of an elephant. But if I have someone in the front, someone in the back, someone underneath, and someone on top, and I have everybody providing a description of what that elephant is, then I have all of the information. Now I can make an informed decision as to what an elephant looks like. The biggest challenge we have when it comes to fighting for the Second Amendment is, once again, we have at least one side who is not interested in all of the information. They're not interested in hearing what you have to say. Children are dying. It's an epidemic. And so we need to do something to stop it. That's their attitude. I always say this, if my car doesn't start, well, I've got to change the tires because I've got to do something. We don't have a gun violence issue in this country. We have a violence issue. We have a generation, we have people who, for one reason or another, have devalued human life. That is what we have got to change. We've got to address, it's not the tool. Firearm is a tool. It is absolutely, that's all it is. I could take every single one of my firearms, I could lay them out on the kitchen table, I could put a bottle of tequila and Jack Daniels and a keg right there, and I could leave them there all night. And guess what? Nothing would happen. Absolutely nothing would happen because they're inanimate objects. They do not possess the ability to be violent. It is the individual who has the ability to be violent. If you want to know whether or not that's the case, just look at what's happening right now in Great Britain. Look at what's happening in London. They're talking now about banning knives. Because there's a rash of knife violence. You have to see some of the rhetoric. It is amazing. You would swear if you just think of everything that you see where they talk about guns here in the state of California, here in these United States, where the gun control advocates are pushing to take guns, take out the word gun, put in the word knife, and you have Great Britain. It is amazing. It is, if it were not so sad, it would be hysterical. But that is where we are. That is exactly where we are right now when it comes to the debate over the Second Amendment in this country. So I always like to say this, and I'll close with this and then we'll go on to question and answer. Understand that the Second Amendment is a civil right. Now, the term civil rights has come to mean for many special rights for special people. If you are the right gender, if you are the right gender identity, if you are the right age, if you are the right religion, then you deserve special protections. But that's not what civil rights are. And that's not what those who fought in the civil rights movement were about. They wanted the rights that were due all people of these United States. They wanted those rights available for them and others. They wanted all people to enjoy the blessings and the rights that are in this country. Civil rights are the rights that are due all citizens. Every single one of us. White males too. Protestant heterosexual white males too. Over the age of 18 and under the age of 65. I know you have to say that because quite frankly, it's like civil rights are for everybody. And the right to keep and bear arms is a fundamental civil right. And make no mistake about it, when it comes to the fight for the Second Amendment, it is a fight for our civil rights. And if we do not fight for our civil rights, we will lose our civil rights. Thank you very much.